Hello everyone, it's David Swinowski here with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today we are going to work on the small bison. So I have the basic silhouette right here. Predetermined thickness. We're going to use the 3 pieces of sandpaper to do our shaping and our polishing on this stone. We're going to start off with the 60 mesh gridded paper. We're going to get rid of those scratches of the 320 grit and then finish it up with the 600 grit at the very end. So with the soapstone, you'll see that it's so soft. It's a rock you can actually scratch with your thumbnail. We're going to use this sandpaper, do some shaping on this rock here today. Okay. So if you want to move in a little bit closer, you'll see just how I finish my small bison. Okay, so now that we've gotten the stone a little bit wet, we can take a look at it, see which side we might want to put our patterns on. For our small school kits, we do recommend that you concentrate your efforts on one side. I could split the legs in half to give me 4 limbs, but that would make them a little bit too thin, prone to breakage. So I like to concentrate my efforts on one side, and I'm going to concentrate mine on the side that I actually used to demonstrate that little thumbnail scratch. So with the first 60 mesh paper, we're going to fold that in half. And that's going to give us a nice coarse ridge right there to do our primary shaping here. Some of the things I like to do with the silhouettes I have, I like to create a neckline. I like to create some depth between the front and the back limbs as well. So with the front shoulder being roughly about here, and the back limbs roughly about there. And the neckline about here. Here's 3 lines that I can use to make those a little bit deeper. If I want the front and back legs to stick out a little bit more, the only way to do that is to pretty much leave them alone and really carve into that stone in between. I'm also going to kind of taper that chin a little bit more. If you wanted to get really fancy and maybe put some horns on the side of the head, you could do that, but you have to remember, anything you want to stand out, you have to leave alone, and you have to carve the other stone around it. So I'm going to work first by creating this neckline. And I'm just using that thin ridge, and I'm just trying to stay on the same path where I want my grooves or my patterns to be. Like a train on the track, I'm just going to chew my way into that rock. Going to create some dust. That's perfectly acceptable. That's why we have the water here. That's what you're expecting when you're removing stone. But when I rinse the dust off of my stone, I'm also going to rinse the dust out of my sandpaper here as well. That way, it freshens that sandpaper up. You can really see how just a few good pushes, just by getting a little bit of depth on that stone, really helps make that pattern stick out, right? That's what we're looking for. So now I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on the pattern in between the front and back legs. Constant contact, constant pressure, just working that sandpaper into the stone. I'm just going to carry those lines over the back towards the other side. So we've got some pretty good lines. definition going on here. A couple other things. I'm going to leave the top of the head fairly wide. I'm going to taper the chin area, but I'm also going to taper the front shoulder. I'm going to make this a bit thinner. And I'm also going to round off these square blocky edges around the back limb. Okay. So if I want to, I can just start by rounding off these edges a little bit first. Rinsing all that dust out. Now it's already starting to round off the back edge, which is great. But I'm also going to want to really dig into the midsection here and really lower that down. So for that, because it's a little bit narrower, I don't want to just use that thinner ridge. I want to thicken it up a little bit. So I'm going to actually use my sandpaper. I'm going to fold it up a couple times to give me a little bit thicker ridge to really work into that space. And all I'm trying to do right now is just make the waist a little bit narrower, because I also want to taper the front shoulder, so I really need to bring this down so I can actually add a little bit of detail onto that front shoulder. And you can really see I'm creating some depth on there. I'm really digging that down. I have to if I want to narrow this top shoulder. As I'm also sanding and carving, there is a striping pattern on the stone here from the bandsaw. I want to try and get rid of that at the same time while I'm carving. And what that's going to do is that's going to help bring out the natural color in this stone. We definitely want to see that. So you can see just how much it really brings that natural color out. So I really want to get rid of the bit of the striping here on the front shoulder and the front of the face to really help bring out that natural color. Little scratches are okay. Don't worry about any scratches that you're making in your stone. We're shaping it right now. And to shape your stone, you're definitely gonna have to scratch it up. We'll get rid of any of those scratches that we don't want with our next 2 stages of sandpaper. So now I'm gonna start to thin the top front shoulder. To taper that so then I can know just how deep I have to make the waist on this bison as well. But I really want to make sure that this shoulder is tapered. On those stripes. Now when you're covering into it, pardon me, you can see how I'm making some depth in here. You don't want to go too far though. I wouldn't go much further than the halfway point in the depth of the stone. That should be more than enough. You don't want to make it too thin in between, because if it gets too narrow in here, it would be prone to breakage as well, okay? I'm also going to taper the chin right now. I'm going to grind that down. I'm going to leave the top part. So I want the top of the head really wide. I just want the bottom part to be narrower. Pardon me. All right. So I'm actually going to incorporate some horns on this guy. So on the very back of the head here, I want to leave that nice and high. I'm actually going to carve the front of the head down a little bit to help raise those horns up a little higher. And I might also need to dig into the back of the neck a little bit as well, just to kind of help get some extra definition onto the horns for the bison here. And as I do so, starting to raise up a little bit of horns there, right? That's what we're kind of looking for. So we can also make sure the front of the head tapers downward to help raise those horns up higher. And I'm also going to carve into the back of the neck a little bit more. But I'm going to make sure it's a thin bit of sandpaper, not a thicker piece. And then how do I want my horns to look? General shape, I'm going to kind of curve them down here. I'm going to thicken out my sandpaper here because as I curve down into the back of the jaw along here, I want to bring all of that down, but just leave the horns. I'm tapering the bottom of the chin anyway. So I want to make sure I keep some defining lines for the neck as well. So I've kind of got a little bit of a curve going on. Now I'm going to kind of create a bit of a line going down this way, and that's what's going to help make those horns kind of pop out a little bit. I'm also going to kind of round off the squared edges at the same time. And if you find your sandpaper isn't working as well on that one spot, open it up and use a different ridge. So I can see I've really got a horn shape there. I might even just kind of get rid of a bit of the stone across this top here, just to kind of really make it look like one small little horn. Instead of splitting them in half, I'll just kind of pretend like it's only one half of the actual bison. So I'll get rid of this middle section, carve that down. So because it's a smaller area, I'm just going to use smaller movements. Concentrate my efforts here. Just doing the best I can. It might take a little bit of time. And depending on the stone, it might not carve as quickly either because it is a metamorphic rock, so you're going to get some variances in the hardness in the stone. They're all going to be relatively soft, but you will find a little bit of a difference in the carvability, just in the color of the stone as well. So we get a beautiful range of colors in this Brazilian stone. Typically, browner stone is softer, green's kind of in the middle, and then the pure black stone tends to be the densest. So one carving you make, it might only take you 5 or 6 scrubs to get that line made. The next carving you make might take you 10, might take you 20. Stone carving isn't a race, it's a process. And right now we are in the process of shaping our stone. See how it's really starting to make that horn kind of stand out a little bit more, right? That's what we're looking for. I can taper this chin a little bit more, and also this back shoulder as well. Sometimes by removing a little bit of stone, it actually allows you a little bit more access. So just by tapering the front part of the shoulder, it's going to allow me a little bit more room in behind the horn, so I can actually do a little bit better job in detailing that. Also making sure I'm getting rid of those gray stripes from the bandsaw as I do my work as well. underneath the chin. I'm just going to kind of round off the back haunches a little bit here. It's got a bit of a flat spot across the top. Just want to round that off. I'm going to really work on that top shoulder a little bit here. It's a little bit higher than I want, so I'm actually going to lower that down a little bit, closer to the top of the horn. If I wanted a tail, I could have created like a V shape on the back or some kind of line for the tail and then just carved into the legs around it to raise that tail up, but I'm not going to worry about a tail for this guy today. Try and kind of melt that front shoulder. Taper that down quite a bit more, right? You can really see how that horn sticks out now. It's looking good, I like it. And now I'm just kind of going over, double checking, making sure any deeper scratches that I don't want are not in here. Make them small scratches, and they're going to be a lot easier to completely erase with sandpaper number 2. Because sandpaper 2 is 320 grit, it's much, much finer than the 60 grit we're using right now. So the smaller we can kind of make our profiling scratches, the easier they'll be to erase when we actually move to our second sandpaper. So the brunt of the work is done with sandpaper number 1. And if you do a really good job with that, sandpaper 2 will be pretty easy. And then if you did a good job with both of those, sandpaper 3 is actually really, really quick. I didn't get too defining with that front horn, because with sandpaper number 2, it's definitely finer, but it can still do a little bit of shaping for you. So I just got the basic shape of that horn, and I'll do my final shaping on that piece with the sandpaper number 2. I just want to get it really, really close. I'm feeling like I'm pretty close to sandpaper number 2 already, which is good. So the legs, I didn't really take too much away on those. I left them pretty bulky. Working on the middle point here. Just bringing that down a little bit more. Rounding off some of those edges. Maybe I will make that horn just a little bit thinner. Very directionally, right? Being very careful with my movements when I'm working in smaller confined spaces. Thumb technique is great, just by putting your sandpaper there, pushing with your thumb. Gives you a lot of strength in a small concentrated area if you know you're going to get rid of a bunch of stone there. Feel pretty good about it. Not a lot of flat spots on it. You know, with the exception of the one side that I left all alone. You know, that side is completely flat, just the way it was when I first got it. Then you turn it around. Got a lot of detail there. The head and neck, horns, front shoulder, back haunches, waist. do a little bit more refining on this horn just before I go to stage 2. I like it. So when I'm completely finished with the shaping and I'm happy with the basic patterns or the designs that I have on my stone, I'm going to take sandpaper number 1, just kind of knock that water out, set it off to the side. Sandpaper number 2 comes in. We're looking at a 320 grit here. That's going to go into the water. All the sandpapers are used in the water. Just really helps get you a better sanding finish, and also it's going to really help trap and maintain the mess that you're making and makes it easier to clean up for when you're all done. So with the sandpaper here, you're going to see the one side has writing on it. This side is just paper. Make sure that you're scrubbing your stone with the opposite side. So just like sandpaper number 1, we're just going to go over, scrub everything right now. But where sandpaper number 1 did the shaping, it left tiny scratches behind. You're going to get rid of those tiny scratches now with sandpaper number 2. When I go to sandpaper number 2 and 3, I don't scrub my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket because of sandpaper number 1. As you can see, there's a couple of bold lines going down here. That's because all that grit has fallen off of this paper as I was using it, and it is now on the bottom of my bucket. This is silicon carbide, and it's harder than the rock that you're carving with right now. So if you're scrubbing your smooth side on the bottom of your bucket against those small bits of silicon carbide, it will be putting tiny scratches back into your carving. So for sandpaper 2 and 3, I just kind of hold it and just make sure I kind of rinse it off. I'll even use my sandpaper almost like a cloth as well, just to kind of rinse that dust off so I can get a better picture of what I'm doing. And you can see how sandpaper number 2 is going to start to get rid of those little scratches and really start to bring out the natural color in this stone. And that's what we're looking for right now. So for sandpaper 2, it's all about consistency. How smooth do you want your stone? How polished do you want to be? The more natural colors you want to see in there, the smoother you want it. And sandpaper 2, just like sandpaper number 1, you can fold this up, make it smaller, give yourself some thinner ridges to get into those hard to reach areas, or just make it easier for you to grip onto as well. I'm actually going to fold it up a couple of times because it is a much thinner paper than the 60 grit. So I like to fold it up a few times, tuck it into those harder to reach areas like underneath the chin. So my finger doesn't really fit in there. So I'm going to use the sandpaper to really get into those hard to reach areas so I can just do the best job possible. Lots of rinsing, especially for sandpaper 2 and 3. Find by rinsing it off, it really helps me see any of the spots that I've missed, so I can take a look. Oh, there's a scratch there. Really concentrate my efforts on getting rid of the scratches that I don't want. Because Sandpaper 3 is a 600 grit, it's pretty much twice as smooth as Sandpaper number 2 here. And Sandpaper 2 is definitely changing the texture on this stone. But because Sandpaper 3 is even smoother, all the scratches that we don't want to see, they should be gone before we go to Sandpaper 3, just to make it a little bit easier for us. If you go to Sandpaper number 2 and you find that there's either some gray stripes on there that you might have missed, or even a deeper scratch that's being a little bit stubborn and not disappearing, you can always go back to Sandpaper number 1, make those deeper scratches or gray stripes smaller so that you can easily erase them with Sandpaper number 2. But if you started smoothing it out and you're like, nope, you know what? I kind of like when it had that texture on there. You could always go back to Sandpaper 1 and then re-sand it just to get that texture back in there. Not every single sculpture I make is smooth. Sometimes I do like to add a little bit of texture into the piece. Now doing a little bit more work around the horn here. I'm going to fold this sandpaper up even more. Give myself a nice thick ridge. Makes it a little bit harder, a little bit stiffer, so I can really kind of use that to shape. If it's too thin, too flimsy, it's a little bit harder to do your shaping with. But if you fold it right up, make it a thicker piece of paper, makes it a little bit more rigid, and you can do a little bit more shaping with it. And because soapstone is so soft, you are kind of limited to some of the details you're going to get in here. I'm not going to get this little horn super pointy, but I'm going to do what I can to get some basic shape to it. Really see how it's kind of sticking out now. So now I got a little bit of a groove on the inside. I can carve the outside over to try and point that horn up a little bit more. I'm just going to refold this in different spots to kind of bring out some fresh sandpaper. In the middle. Rinsing it carefully. And I'm just rinsing. I'm looking for any spots that I might have missed while I was sanding away. And if I see any, I'm just going to get them really quick. You can also feel your stone as well. Very textural right now. If you like that smooth surface, you can definitely use texture as a telltale sign as well. Just feel everywhere. Make sure it's getting smooth. And because I was pretty thorough and consistent with stage 1, stage 2 is going to be pretty quick for me. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. I'm seeing all that natural color coming through. Pretty happy with that. So when I'm finished with sandpaper number 2, again, I just kind of knock that water out of there, set it off to the side. And then the final sandpaper, the 600 grit, goes in the water. Again, making sure I'm not scrubbing my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket. I'm just going to fold this sandpaper up right away. And quick once over. That's all it takes. And 600 grit, it's going to really smooth that surface right now. It should feel almost like glass. You should really see that color coming through now. Stone carving is a lot like having a picture that's out of focus. Once we use our sandpapers, we get rid of that kind of blurry image and bring those beautiful colors, minerals, and natural patterns into a clear picture for us to see. Just being careful in the classroom right now. Wanting to show all your friends. Most of the accidents that I see in a classroom happen near the end of the class. When you're almost finished, you're getting excited, you try to rush. Try and take your time, just be thorough. And if you're going to show your friends, try and show your friends while you're above your bucket instead of above the floor. This way it'll minimize any droppage and breakages on the floor. But if it should happen, just stop, let everything dry, use a super glue, glue those broken pieces back together, let that glue cure, and you can go right back to sanding or carving, whichever stage you are in. It's pretty rare that you can't repair this stone. I'm getting pretty close to finished here already, as I was saying. Sandpaper 3, if you did a really good job on sandpaper 1 and 2, sandpaper 3 is really quick. It's just a quick once over. Some people think that if you just spend more time with it, it'll get smoother and smoother and smoother. This sandpaper is only going to do so much. It's only going to get it so smooth. Find the harder the rock is, the better a polish you can get on it. But then you have to go through more stages. Quartz, for instance, I go to a 14,000 grit. Jade, I'll go to a 50,000 grit. And then diamonds and sapphires, you're going to go to a 100,000 grit. But it's not going to be paper, it's going to be diamond paste. So the harder tools, you use harder stones, or you require different tools to do that process, but it's still a process nonetheless. Just trying to be thorough with my 600 grit, making sure I get every nook and cranny that I want polished. And once I'm happy and I'm finished with my carving, I'm going to take this and rinse it off in clean water. I want to get this dusty water off of my carving. I want to let it dry thoroughly. I typically let that sit for 1 day just to make sure it's nice and dry, because the very final step is this oil. And of course, oil and water don't mix. That's why we need to make sure that it's clean and dry. We want to make sure that there's no dust particles on this rock as well for that oiling process. So well, maybe a couple more spots. As I feel, very textural for me, I can still feel a couple spots that, well, they could be a little bit smoother, so I'm just going to go right back over those. Use the thumb technique on there. Always works really, really well. And just really kind of run that sandpaper around the base of that horn and on the inside as well. There it is. It's the general bison shape I've decided to go with today. So I've really tapered the chin on the bison. I've really brought the middle down. I've also tapered the front shoulder. Made sure I rounded off a bunch of those square blocky edges as well. And then created a horn on the front by dropping the head down a little bit. And then the back of the neck to kind of help raise that horn up a little bit. So now I'm going to rinse this off, start that drying process before we do the final oiling. All right, so now that we've completed the final sanding, we rinsed that off, allowed it to dry overnight. We have a nice, clean, dry surface. We can do the final oiling. So just using the oil that's provided in the kit. Use a Q-tip. Just give this a nice liberal coating. I always like to put a piece of paper towel down just to keep the oil off the surface of whatever I'm working on. Trying to make sure you're getting every bit of the carving. If you want to oil the opposite side first, when you flip it over, it's done completely. I'm just going to oil this one side for the video here today. I like to let the oil sit for at least 2 hours before wiping off any excess oil on there. And with these smalls, you usually have enough for a couple coats. I just want to make sure there's no dry spots on my carving. That looks pretty good. All right, so that is the small bison kit. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. Check out our website to see other kit designs that we have available as well. And if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to see more tips and tricks from us at Rubble Road Soapstone. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm David Swinowski.